I'm sure I'm not the only person who's noticed that when Hungarian Prime Minister Orban and German Chancellor Angela Merkel are together at public events, various international meetings, that they seem to have a very warm regard for each other. They exchange very intense and friendly gazes, regardless of what they may be agreeing or disagreeing about in the moment. My theory of this is that they are the two heads of government in Europe today who were present at the creation, whose political careers began in the revolutions of 1989, and who have continued in those careers throughout the tumultuous epoch that followed. In that year, the 26-year-old Hungarian student activist played a dramatic and influential role in throwing off the yoke of Soviet communism. He has been at the center of Hungarian and European politics through the post-communist period of the 1990s, the financial crisis of the 2000s, the immigration crisis of the 2010s. He's built a formidable political party that has won large majorities in a succession of elections. He has been prime minister for 14 years, and here he is. He's still here with us, boldly at the forefront. He is not only a political but an intellectual leader. In a series of arresting addresses, he has spoken with astonishing candor for a man in his position about his evolution of his thinking about national conservatism. His views have occasionally been misunderstood or even deliberately misrepresented by the media. So we are very fortunate to hear from him directly and honored that he would join us at this conference. Prime Minister Orban, let's go back to 1989. We have a premise at this conference that today's national conservatism movement is a direct outgrowth of 1989, but many things have changed. What do you think of when you think of your current work and your experiences in 1989, times you may have spent with any of our three protagonists? We've added Margaret Thatcher to the pantheon. You may have known her.
Okay, first, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure and privilege to be with you just this afternoon. I have an answer to the first question.
Yes.
The transformation of the Eastern European territory of Europe, and later on, but first some reaction on the names you have mentioned. So one of my first confrontation with the Western politics happened when I have visited Margaret Thatcher in 1990 as a prime minister. You know, I was that time already prime minister, elected in 98 first time. And I visited Margaret Thatcher, who was not in office, but I was in London, and I thought, you know, as a respect, I would like to see her. And I knocked on her door, on his private flat, and she opened and she said, "I totally disagree with you." And I said, "Good morning." You know? So and it was, finally it became clear the reason was that I opposed the NATO action to launch any military action from the territory of Hungary against Yugoslavia, to open a front line on the southern border of Hungary, because that would be a war for Hungary anyway. And that was not good for the British soldiers anyway who served on the south part of Yugoslavia. So it was a clear-cut British interest. Totally disagree with me. So that was my meeting with her anyways. And Ronald Reagan, just you have mentioned as well, you know, my generation in Hungary, we considered Ronald Reagan as the deliberator of our personal life. So without Ronald Reagan, there would be no chance to push the Russians, the Soviet Union out of Central Europe, and to get rid of the communists. That's so clear. So, and instead of having a complicated argument, one sentence of Ronald Reagan changed the world. The sentence was, according to the stories or the legend, inviting his advisors on geostrategical issue, and he said that we change our strategy and we have a new strategy. The question, what's that? And he answered, we win, they lose. And that's a very important moment, because till that moment, the concept of the West was to keep the balance with the communist and Soviet Union, which means that the target was not to win, just to peacefully coexist. And he changed it and said, we will win, which means that the captive nations as we were became free again. So, admiration to him. And John Paul, the other person, probably John Paul, I met him several times, which is not an easy issue. It's rather complicated because I'm a Calvinist anyway. And the Calvinist-Catholic relationship in the Hungarian history is rather complicated. But we never considered the Holy Father as a Catholic Vatican leader, We always consider as the biggest defender of the Central European countries on the world stage, whatever is, the religious background. And I have a short story. I lost the election, or we lost the election in 2002 after 4 years in government. And after the losing, I was decorated by the Pope, by the Holy Father, sending the medal to me, which is the highest decoration anyway. And as far as I remember, never any Calvinist can get it anyway. So, but anyway, and the message was that you have got it not for what you have done up to now, but for what you will do. So, so still I have a very personal living, even if he's not with us anymore, I have a very personal relation to him even today. So back to 1990 anyway. So in 1990, just to have a little bit understand what the hell I am doing in politics. So in 1990, so our party was established in 88, 2 years prior to the destroyment of the communist regime. And the reason why we were young intellectuals, students, young teachers, researchers on various institutions and so on, football player, semi-professional as me. So we have very normal jobs, to be done, not to be politician. That was not the ambition. But in 88, we realized that something will happen soon. And the Soviet Union structure is not strong enough to survive. The communist regime is very unstable. So now this is the right moment to do something. And in 88, we established a political movement with an age limit. The age limit was 35. So nobody who was elder than 35 was allowed to step into the party, because we established a radical anti-communist party. And we thought that we are out of any consensus and cooperation with the communist regime. We are radical anti-communist. But the elder generation, because the nature of the life, tend more to make some compromises on communist thinking and communist politics. So therefore, we had that age limit. Later on, we removed anyway, but obvious reasons. But our attitude was always being strongly anti-communist. It was not just anti-communist in terms of national independence against Soviet Union. It was not just, anti-communist, pro-liberty, freedom, and so on, democracy against communists. But it was, radical anti-communism against the communist way of thinking, the Marxist way of thinking, which is still going on, Now I just try to understand with different languages, using different kind of words, but the same logic, the liberal professors and politicians arguing, using different words, but meaning the same thing, as the Marxists did. So that's the reason why we still feel ourselves the same anti-communist radical politicians as we were 30 years ago, fighting sometime the same battle. That's the point. In that respect, 1990 has a relevance on our policy even today.
Thank you. The Pope told you this was for the future. So let me ask you a little bit about the politics and your career since 1990. In the national conservatism movement, we say every nation is independent, it charts its own course, but after all, Hungary is a medium-sized nation. It is subject to powerful forces. There's Russia on the one side, there's the EU on the other, there is Turkey and the Middle East and Africa to the south. There is the dynamics of the European economy. All of these exert pressure. How do you manage Hungarian politics with all of these pressures from the outside? Is it good, is it an advantage or a disadvantage to be surrounded by so many forces?
Being smaller than the neighbors is a disadvantage. Being bigger, it's an advantage, no question of that. That's the normal logic of the life. But anyway, so I would like to distinguish our difficulties with Moscow, Berlin, and Turkey historically, and Istanbul historically, and another one, the difficulties with European Union, which basically two different points. So if you are a Hungarian, you are living in a geopolitical gap. Because, you know, one side, the Slavics, the Slavs. Right. On the other side, the Germans, and south down, the Muslims. So that's the place where we live. So we have to have a very sharp, always ready attitude to politics, because anytime anything can happen. If you look at the Hungarian history, you know, we were occupied by the Muslims, by Ottomans, I mean, by the Germans and by the Soviet Union and the Russians. So, you know, geopolitically, it's not easy to manage to have a national-based, sovereign, independent policy for your government or for your nation. So it's rather complicated to find a way how you can manage the proper relation to all three. But anyway, what we have now, the difficulty with European Union is a different one, because we have some difficulties. And the difficulties origin from a different approach to the question how to build Europe. Because there are two approaches at this moment. One is which would like to build up Europe from the bottom, which means a kind of cooperation of the nations. And the other concept is to build Europe from above, from the top, which is a federalistic, empire-oriented approach, which don't like to have sovereign states. And that kind of competition of the two approaches is an ongoing process every day in the European Union. That's the main reason why we have so often open disputes with many leaders of European Union and with the institutions of European Union, because we insist on to build Europe from the bottom, which means respect of the national sovereignty, and find a way how the sovereign nations can cooperate in order to find the common interest of the European nation. So this is another problem. But, you know, 10 million country, having, it's not a state secret, not more than 30,000 soldiers, you know, you have to be humble and smart at the same time. Small countries' leaders, small countries cannot afford not to have smart leaders. It's a privilege of the great countries. You know, so, sorry for that.
And yet, you have done very well. There are many people at this conference who, in Italy, in France, in Sweden, in other countries, would like to build a movement, a party, to make as much difference in their countries as you have. So what do you have to tell these people from your 14 years in power,
Okay,
16 years out of power?
Okay. First of all, we have to understand the character of what we are doing in Hungary. So I would like to be very clear that we are not better than many of the other conservative leaders in Europe. We are not smarter, we are not more skillful. That this is not the case. The difference between the conservative politicians in Italy, France, Germany, Spain, and Hungary is that we have no pressure to have a coalition with any other party because we have a majority in the parliament. And the media word is not like in Western Europe, 90% for progressive liberals and 10% for conservatives, more balanced. I can't say balanced, but more balanced than in West. So when I stand up and say something, I don't make any compromise just because I have a, you know, a coalition partner or limited media background. So I am the only lucky man in the European politicians among the conservatives who can say what I think. So you know, that's so, but I know them. I know them very much. They are the same level committed to the Christian tradition. They are the same level committed to the national pride, the national sovereignty and freedom and so on, like me or like us. So there's no difference. They're same like we are. But you know, just because of the circumstance, fighting for power in a reasonable way, simply they cannot afford to say what they think, you know. Because don't forget that politics here probably looks like as an intellectual activity. Don't misunderstand. This is not the case. We are doers, you know. You are thinkers, but we are doers. So politics is about make decisions and to get the credibility of the nation and get the power and keep the power, you know. If you are not skillful enough to keep the power, you know, how you will make decisions which is in favor of your nation. So it's quite logical that it's a natural target of all the politicians to get a majority and go to the government and do something. But if they can't do in a way to say what they think, they will never say. That's so simple. In Hungary, we were lucky enough in 2010 to get 2/3 majority, having the background from the anti-communist resistance movement, which is a natural inclination to say what we think. So both elements met, and the result is here. The result is here. That's the Hungarian politics now. So that's the first. But the second is, if you make advice. So I would not like to educate anybody because circumstances are so different in all countries. But the first thing is, if you are not, you know, the number one precondition to be successful in politics is braveness. Brave to take the risk. If you don't stand up and don't say what you think, whatever are the consequences, you will be never a leader. And you will never have a big party. So it's not an advice. I can't say it's an advice, but you know, look at EPP. So we belong to the family of the EPP parties. What's going on in EPP? We are suspended anyway now because of the black sheep of the community. But you know, the point is that EPP would like to be part of the power structure of European Union by any means. And if the price of that to give up certain values in order to make compromise with the left, we do so. And then we are losing our identity step by step. We became centrist and then liberal and leftist-oriented political family. The process is going on. So if you don't stand up and say, guys, we are losing our values, we are losing our profile, we don't know anyway anymore who we are, and the people who are our voters are not able to identify us on the value basis, what the hell are we doing? What is the sense to be in politics and being politicians? So if we don't say sometimes that, and to say, open a new chapter, you know, you will always just moving to the leftist liberal direction because the media, the pressure, the universities, the intellectual life majority, always pushing you to give up more and more element of your original ideology or your original principles or values. And that's how the conservative suffers now in Europe. So this is the situation. So I try to manage a counter-revolution anyway, but very few candidates I have got up to now. That's but hopefully it will happen.
You have been able to speak your mind, do what you want to do, because you're at the head of a very big party. It took 30 years for this to emerge, so there was a lot of work. And you could just take credit for being in this position that your counterparts in other countries are in. But it could be that there's something about Hungarian institutions, political culture, that has been helpful to you.
Yes. Okay, I spent 16 years in opposition and 14 years in government as prime minister. So I know the job from both directions. I have some basis to make some comparison, the Hungarian political culture with the others. You know, the Hungarians are very complicated, very special. You are in a hopeless situation to understand it anyway. But somehow probably you can approach it, you know, because it's a nation without having any relatives in European Union. So when the prime ministers of European Union meet each other regularly, I am the only prime minister who don't understand of the languages of anybody else. You know, the majority of the prime minister understands the language of at least one or two other countries. But I'm the only one who is alone always, because, you know, the Hungarians is, you know, we are just getting here in a miracle way. We are an Eastern nation which moved to the West anyway and survived 1,000 years ago. But the Hungarian instinct, therefore, is twofold. First is, you know, it's a freedom-loving nation, which is good for us, I mean, in the political term. So, because we always represented the freedom of the nation, the freedom of the people, the Christian liberty, all that kind of values. But second, Hungarians understand that history and politics is a risky thing. So the basic instinct of the Hungarians is to appreciate the stability. Hungary is the only country in Europe that after 1990, there was no early election at all. In all other countries that happened. Even in Germany, which is the most stable country. But under Schröder chancellery, there was early election. Hungary is the only country when all parliaments served the 4-year terms over. So, therefore, the Hungarians understand, because of geopolitical situation, because of culturally being alien to the neighbors, you know, that stability is the most important thing. There are countries, like where we are, okay, there is no government, who cares? You know, the country works, basically. Okay, it's better to have a government than not to have, but basically, you know, the country is able to perform well, you know, the economy is working, the cultural life is producing a certain level. But there are some other countries when the stability is not there in the government, you know, the performance of the society immediately is decreased. Hungary is a country like that. So the Hungarians understand that we have to have stable government, otherwise we are in trouble, not just in politics, but in all spectra of the national life. So that's probably help us also to stay in power. You know, as I mentioned, after Angela, probably I'm the second longest serving prime minister in Europe with my 14 years. It's partly because of the instinct of the Hungarian nation. Not because of my performance, I mean. Poor Hungarians.
How much difference does it make to the future of national conservatism in Hungary? How well it succeeds in other countries? Okay, it sounds to me like part of your success is precisely that you're somewhat isolated, and so that there's a culture that prizes stability within, so that you can weather many storms from abroad.
Yeah, because national identity is a precondition of national conservatism and any success, if I understand correctly, the international politics. I'm not arguing in favor of China. I'm not arguing in favor of Russia. I'm not arguing in favor of Turkey. But they are success stories by their own way. And look at them, how they managed it. There are different recipes how to do it, but all of them first started to re-strengthen their national identity. Without having strong national identity, simply cannot be successful in modern age. That's my point. And they all understood it. Second, because of the face wind is so strong in Europe, from the liberal media and the intellectual life and universities, the only way to survive as national conservative or Christian democratic leader like me is being successful. If you are not successful, you know, there is no any kind of help and support from outside. If you make a mistake and figures of economy is going down, you are killed next morning. So we must be successful. If the conservative politics is not successful in Hungary, we can't survive the next morning. So we must be successful. And you know, I try to be as humble as I can, but, you know, last years we have had 4 and 5% economic growth rate every year. Unemployment rate was, when I have started 2010, 12%. Now it's 3%. Basically full employment we have. So state indebtedness was 85% of the GDP. Now it's less than 70. So financial and economic success is the precondition to run any conservative politics, because the face wind. So if you are not successful locally running your government well, internationally you will be killed next morning. That's the reason why we are not indebted. So many conservatives thinking in an easier way on budget and state indebtedness issues, especially the Anglo-Saxons like to do so. But in Hungary, we can't do that. If the figures getting worse, the pressure on us is immediately growing and growing and growing. So I have to be financially very, very stable. Otherwise, there is no basis to run our conservative politics. And we will follow the same track as many conservatives to adjust themselves to the mainstream in order to survive. So therefore, we have to be very disciplined financially.
The conservatives, the Trump administration in America, the Boris Johnson government in the UK, they don't seem to care about fiscal restraint. It used to be part of the conservative creed, and now both parties in these two countries seem not to care about it at all. How have you survived? I mean, how have you been able to make do with a constraint that everybody else would have thought was impossible?
But because of the dollar and for other as international money and currency, they have always some additional instruments how they can rebalance their budget and foreign trade. And they can negotiate like President Trump just did with the Chinese to say, give me 200 billion euro more trade, export possibilities, This is not the instrument what the Hungarian can use, so we have to have more sophisticated way, So probably that's the reason of the difference of the approaches.
Hungary is a very democratic country. People are very opinionated. To some extent, the polarization that we see in politics across Europe and the United States is true there. There are people that are for the government, that are against the government. There are people probably within your own party that have big disagreements. But the polarization doesn't seem to have weakened your institutions. In America, polarization has dramatically weakened the institutions we inherited. Okay. I'm not sure what I'm asking, but it seems to me a different. I don't think that there's no political polarization in Hungary.
Yeah, we have very much similar leftist opposition than President Trump has, definitely. But somehow the Hungarian attitude is different, There is a saying in the Hungarian politics that it goes like that, the nation cannot be in opposition, which means that nation is something which is above the party structure. Even if you are in opposition, you have to serve the nation, because nation is something above you, So therefore, okay, I'm not an expert in America, but if I understand correctly the American politics, many people hate more Donald Trump than love their own nation. And I think it's getting more and more legitimate. In Hungary, probably there are some people who hate more me than like the nation, but it's illegitimate to say it. So, because somehow the standard is that to love the nation is a must. To serve the nation is a must. Because what else could be more important that you were born as Hungarian? And if not Hungary is the first, what is the first, So, therefore it's very, very, I can't say, the Hungarian people are not national-oriented, I can't say that, but by instinct, they feel that without the nation, their individual life would have been or would be far worse. So we need the nation. It's a common waltz. So therefore, we have to raise it up as much as we can, even if you are leftist or rightist.
So you have shown how democratic politics can support, in the circumstances of Hungary, a strong national conservatism movement.
because of the movement is successful economically.
Because of the economic success.
So.
You have also said things that suggest that in liberal politics, democratic politics, there's a tendency towards what you would call responsibility-free, rights-based liberalism. You know, promising something to everybody, doing away with the idea of individual responsibility. So do you worry that there's this tendency in the wrong direction in one country or another? Or if we have to regain the culture, maybe people who are familiar with democratic politics will be the best at it?
So first of all,
I promise never to ask you two
okay.
questions at the same time.
But you know, I try to find the first one.
Yeah.
So it's easier to say populism, you know, because we are accused being populist, you know. And when I was young, 20 years ago, populism had a very clear meaning that the politician promised something but not able to deliver. That's populism, yeah. But if a politician promised something and then deliver, it's not, you know, it's not populism, it's democracy, you know. So in Hungary, I can't say that I was able to fulfill to 100% all of my promises. 10 years ago when I became again Prime Minister, I made a promise or undertaken something saying that in 10 years' time we will produce 1 million new jobs. In a country with 10 million, at that time working only 3,800,000 people, to create 1 million jobs is something. And now, after 9 years, we created 860,000 jobs. So it's not 100%, you know, but you know, 86% now, and I still have 1 more year. So probably we can do it. So therefore, okay, or I promise that instead of the welfare economy, because in Europe the fashion is welfare economy. Okay, I said, look guys, welfare economy will not work. So we have to transform our economy into the so-called workfare economy. And I said that workfare economy will bring more welfare than the welfare economy. And if you look at the salaries now, the wages, if you look at the number of the jobs, if you look at the living standard, you know, how much percentage of the society is still poor, you know, it's obvious that we provided more welfare on the basis of workfare society. That's the point. So back to the liberal approach. So in our understanding, the liberal government failed, obviously failed 2 times in 1 decade. First is 2008, financial crisis in Europe. Liberal governments failed. They were not able to regulate in a proper way the economy, and they were not able to defend their own economy against the crisis. And it was not just, you know, because of the conjunctura, it was because of the structure and losing the competitiveness. And then in 2015, the liberal governments failed 2nd time. That was the migration crisis. And the liberal governments failed to protect their own citizens. They failed to protect their own borders and the security of their own citizens and stop illegal migration. So it means that liberal governments failed. And the principal basis for liberal governments was liberal democracy. So I said liberal democracy in that sense is over. We need something new. We can call it illiberal, we can call it post-liberal, you can call it Christian Democrat, whatever, but you know, we need something new. Because on that basis, we cannot provide good governance for the people. And don't forget that democracy means 2 things. First, to provide chance of participation for the citizens, and second, a good governance. You know, democracy has no sense without good governance. And now it's obvious that on liberal basis, we cannot provide good governance for the people. So we develop a new theory, a new approach, that is Christian democracy. And instead of liberal freedom, we use Christian liberty. So we have a wording how we describe our system we have built up. It's very unique. Nobody likes it outside Hungary anyway. The liberal press always attacking, making jokes on us. But you know, it works. And the people vote for it again and again and again. So this is my approach, and that's the reason why I believe Christian democracy. And this is probably the point I have to make some comment on the Catholics. Because, you know, national sovereignty and Christian democracy and anti-empire attitude as we have, you know, somehow involve the Catholic Church into the discussion. As some of the professors pointed out on their book, if we would like to build up national sovereign states, we have to resist all the attempt to build empire. And I would like to mention that the reason why we think that Christian democracy is a good description for us, that the universal Catholic approach is the only one, I'm a Calvinist anyway, the only one which appreciate and accept the national sovereignty. It's a global idea, but consider as a value of having sovereign states. So that's the reason why in Hungary, where 75% is Catholic, 25% is Calvinist, we are able to cooperate for national sovereignty on a Christian democratic basis. So that creates a national unity for national sovereignty, as we understand. So Christian democracy, I think, is the best framework to conceptualize what we are doing.
What are the prospects for successful nation states such as yours in your immediate neighborhood?
You know, we have a complicated history with all the nations. And for long decades, Central Europe was considered as rather a danger to the European stability. It was rather considered ideologically and from a political stability point of view, a danger. But nowadays, if you look at the European map, the most successful group of nations and the most successful region of Europe is Central Europe. We are living together peacefully. Growth rate is 4%, 5%. FDI and investments in this region is growing. And the economic growth rate of the European Union is basically provided in Central Europe. So I think when I'm speaking about the success of Hungary, certainly I'm a little bit biased, but I have to mention that, you know, all the other countries around us are very much successful. The Slovaks do well, the Czechs excellently, the Polish are stronger than ever, you know. Croats are catching up. The Serbs try to join the European Union. So what I represent here is not just a success story of a country, but a success story of a region. And everywhere in this region, the governments are national sovereignty based, national conservative, all. Whatever party, family they belong to in Brussels, basically if you analyze the principal basis of their policy, they are all national conservative governments. And that's related to the success. So you can have a great hope and expectations that renovation and the new current, new blood to the national conservatism could come from Central Europe. So if you would like to write about exciting stories and success stories, not just critical works anyway, on the liberals, come to Central Europe and try to translate and make understandable what's going on in many countries in Central Europe.
Is Ukraine a separate case?
Yes. Ukraine is a separate case, first of all, because it's a young country. So don't forget that the Polish state is 1,000 years old. Czechish also, Hungarians also. Ukraine was always at the borderline between Russia and Europe, and so the statehoodness as such has not as a long history as we have. And you know, it's very difficult to be a Ukrainian state because, you know, the Russians, you know, we were neighbor with Russia for 45 years. Trust me, it's not easy. Especially when their tanks is standing on your soil anyway. So the Russians, after collapsing of Soviet Union, developed a new approach. And they said that because of NATO is so close now, they need buffer zones all around Russia. Whether is it legitimate internationally or not, but they said, okay, countries like Ukraine should be impact of Russia 50% and the West 50%. And when the Ukrainian people decided that they would like rather join more or get closer to the West, the Russians reacted immediately. So therefore, Ukraine cannot be considered as part of the Central European success story because they are just fighting for their survival because of their different geopolitical situation. Full sympathy with them, but it's very difficult anyway.
The immigration crisis of 2015 has played a major role in the rise of conservative movements and parties around Europe. You have had several successes in stabilizing the situation. So is that a problem solved and we don't have to worry about it and you can turn to other things? Or are there looming additional problems for Hungary or for Europe more generally?
Okay, so first of all, just as a description, in Hungary we have Muslim migrants, that number, so 0. So we don't have. So the Hungarian situation is totally different from the Western countries and the Southern countries. And you know, it's a poor mathematics to understand where the Western countries will develop in terms of demography and composition of their societies. You know, mathematics is a very severe thing. So it's obvious that they will create, it will be developed or evolved a society which will be a composition of a big Muslim community, which is growing, and the Christian community, which is decreasing anyway. So that's how the Western countries will look like, whether we like it or not. It's not a wish. It's not a critique. It's a description. You know, that's going on, not just because of the migration crisis 2015, but because the previous 30 years, as they understood the whole issue of migration, and because of the poor performance of the families anyway, in terms of reproduction of their nations in many countries. So the outcome in many countries will be a society, a new type of society, consisting of decreasing Christian element and then, you know, increasing Muslim element. The liberals support that process because the liberals think it's good. They don't like the Christian society. They don't like the identity as we understand the societies. So they think that that new composition of the Western societies would provide nicer life, a better life than it was during the so-called Christian Europe. So therefore, they support that process. In Central Europe, we have a different approach. We don't know whether they are right or not. Probably their life and their society will be happier as a mixed society, probably. But we would not like to take the risk. So that's our point. My target is not to convince the Westerners that what they are doing is bad, because it's not my job. It's their nation, it's their country. What I would like to ask them, not to force us to follow the same track they are proceeding on. That's the Central European position. So just to clarify the present situation and political disputes. But second is, the migration crisis became important not just because of migration. It's because the migration crisis raised the issue of identity. And the identity issues was forbidden in the Western political disputes. It was not PC. It was not correct. So to raise the question who we are, what's happening, what kind of changes are going on in our society, where is our national identity, where is our religious identity, these issues were not fashionable, may I say in that way, in the last 20, 30 years. But because of the migration crisis, there was no chance to avoid that dispute. And that's the reason why now, in many countries, at the center of the political disputes we have is the identity issues. To be a French, what does it mean? To be a German, what does it mean? It's even more complicated anyway. To be Italian, what does it mean, you know? Or to be Central European or Hungarian. So these issues are legitimate again. That's the reason why books written by some of you, you know, Strange Deaths of Europe, Virtue of Nationalism, and that kind of books became very, very popular in Hungary and Central Europe because now the issue is, you know, on the surface. We can't avoid to dispute that issues. So therefore, migration, bad, because, you know, it's a real danger. But on the other way, you know, that's generated disputes which provided some chance for us to explain who we are and raise the question that without defining again who we are, we cannot be successful and competitive with those nations, as I mentioned, who are just strengthening their own national identity. So the dispute is okay. The dispute is good. The dispute is the only chance for national conservatives to get majority in a society. Because, you know, to get majority does not mean that you have a majority, you know, in the government. Majority means that you have a majority of the opinion of the people. And the migration issue is a good cause to explain, again, Christian Democrats and National Conservatives to the people what is at the stake, what is really important, and how we imagine the future. So use the chance. That was always my point. Okay, it's a bad development, of course, because turmoil in Africa and so on, and because of the pressure on the border is not good. But intellectually, don't miss the chance to clarify against who you are and what is your vision on your own future. So that's how we understand migration. And I insist on to raise the question again and again because that dispute strengthens the national identity of the Hungarians, the Central Europeans, and hopefully all around Europe. That's the reason why many new movements, national conservative character, came up just as a consequence of the dispute based on and organized around the migration issue. So that's how I see that. It's complicated. Right. It's not just good, but not just bad. But anyway, I just would like to underline the major challenge to the European politicians, that Europe soon means, you know, I'm relatively young, you know. In 20 years, it's a reasonable perspective, 20 years from my personal point of view, you know. So it's a legitimate question that in 20 years' time, Europe will show a different picture on the Western part, on the civilization basis, and on the Eastern part. And if we would like to build a kind of Europe and the cooperation of the European nations, it's difficult to answer how we can cooperate if we became so different as the processes are going on. It's a real intellectual and political challenge at the same time.
Thank you. I have a final question. Please. And in a way, it's a sort of a standard final question, but I hope you'll take it seriously. You've advised the people coming into politics to be brave. You have built a very solid political foundation in a nation that values stability, and you have a career still to look forward to. It appears you still do brave things. You have a pro-natalist policy that you have been introducing. This is a new departure. I'm sure it's, I don't know, but I'm sure that there are controversies around it. Do you have a series of big ambitions? What do you hope to achieve in the next 4, 8 years, whatever time remains to you as the leader of the Hungarian government? Or,
yeah, no.
and you know,
don't worry.
You can blow me off. You can say, look, I deal with problems okay. from Tuesday to Wednesday to Thursday. That's enough.
So, okay, first of all, what we Hungarians are doing and what I am doing is not a natural, may I say, it's not an organic thing. 10 million country, no nuclear weapon, small GDP, and so on and so on. So the play we roll in Europe is not organic. That would be not our job. To fight against the liberal mainstream is not the job of a small country. To fight against the intellectual face wind, and to change the attitude of the politicians in the Western country is not the job of Hungary and a small country like we are. The simple reason, as I have explained, that we play that role because there is nobody else. So my biggest hope is somebody else will come and replace us, you know. So that's the reason I try to find partners in Italy, in Spain, and I hope that the upcoming new political forces, you know, bigger countries will take the same flag and take the role of us away, or join us, or, you know, leading that fight. Just, okay, I would not like to reveal any secret, but I met President Abascal, you know. And my impression is that, you know, one group of the politicians in Europe, especially the elder generation, the target is nothing else just to stay in power somehow. The other group of the people, especially the young generation, is coming to do something. And when I explained my observation to President Abascal today, that this is a party, I mean his party, would like to do something, he said, not something, we would like to do everything. You know, so this is the attitude I hope will come up again. You know, some passion, enthusiasm, being electrified, some love of politics, you know. So I'm waiting for new generation and new movements full of energy and strength. Otherwise, you know, the old way of politicians that we do, the traditional elite in Europe, will never make competitive Europe again. So we need new movements, new parties, and so on. So my hope is that the transformation process which has started by the last European election, that EPP and socialists lost the possibility just to run Europe, two of us, making a compromise. Because we are not enough anymore in the European Parliament. We don't have 50%. So we need new forces, and that transformation process started, and it will go ahead. And hopefully the old parties, like socialists, the liberals, and the Christian Democrats, EPP, is able to adjust themselves to this new challenge. But we need a new challenge. And only the new movements represent new challenges to us. Otherwise, we will never change our attitude, and therefore Europe will be never competitive again. So good luck for the newcomers, even if they don't belong to our political family.
Okay. Please let me say a formal thank you to Prime Minister Orban for being with us, for the extraordinarily interesting and inspiring comments that he made, and on behalf of everyone, let me wish you Godspeed.